April 28, 1945. A man in a German greatcoat, collar turned up, head down, tries to blend into a convoy of retreating Nazi soldiers. He's wearing sunglasses, fake documents in his pocket, his mistress beside him. This isn't just any fugitive. This is a man who, just 23 years earlier, had millions cheering his name. A man who invented the blueprint for modern fascism. A man who Adolf Hitler once called his hero. His name? Benito Mussolini. And in less than 24 hours, his bullet-riddled body will be hanging upside down at a gas station while crowds spit on his corpse. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Mussolini didn't start as Hitler's puppet. He started as his idol, the man Hitler looked up to, the original fascist strongman. So how did it all go so catastrophically wrong? Stay with me, because this 20-year fall from grace is more dramatic, more brutal, and more pathetic than anything Hollywood could dream up. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, it's the Untold World War Stories. And this is where we move deep into history's most fascinating train wrecks. The stories they don't teach you in school, the personalities that shaped our world, and the cautionary tales that still echo today. Today, we're tackling one of the most spectacular collapses in modern history. We're talking about Benito Mussolini, how he seized power, how he became the template every dictator copied, and how he ended up as Hitler's embarrassing, incompetent sidekick before meeting one of the most humiliating ends any leader has ever faced. This is an interesting revelation, so grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get into it. But first, if you appreciate deep, well-researched content like this, do me a favor. Please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're building something special here, a community that actually cares about understanding history, not just consuming it. And trust me, what's coming up is going to blow your mind. All right, let's start at the beginning. Here's something that might surprise you. Mussolini didn't start as a right-wing nationalist. He started as a socialist revolutionary. Born in 1883 in a small Italian town, Mussolini grew up poor. His father was a blacksmith and a committed socialist who named his son after three revolutionary heroes. Young Benito absorbed those radical ideas like a sponge. By his 20s, Mussolini was a full-blown socialist agitator. He wrote for socialist newspapers. He got arrested multiple times for inciting riots and violence. He was expelled from Switzerland for trying to organize strikes. This guy was a legitimate firebrand, passionate, angry, and convinced that socialism was the answer to Italy's problems. But then came World War I, and everything changed. In 1914, when war broke out, most socialists opposed it. The official party line was pacifism. Workers shouldn't kill other workers for capitalist interests. Makes sense, right? But Mussolini broke ranks. He started arguing that Italy needed to enter the war, that nationalism and violence could be revolutionary forces, that sitting on the sidelines was cowardice. The Socialist Party expelled him, called him a traitor. And honestly, they weren't wrong. But here's the thing. Mussolini didn't care. He'd discovered something more powerful than ideology. He'd discovered that he could use nationalism, violence, and spectacle to mobilize people in ways socialism never could. He enlisted, fought in the trenches, got badly wounded by a grenade explosion, and when he came back as something entirely new. Not a socialist, not a conservative, something else entirely, a fascist. Post-war Italy was chaos, total chaos. The economy was destroyed. Unemployment was rampant. People were angry. The government seemed helpless. Socialists and communists were gaining ground, which terrified the middle and upper classes. Into this mess stepped Mussolini, with his newly formed Fasci di Combattimento, the fascist combat squads. These weren't politicians, they were street brawlers dressed in black shirts who went around beating up socialists, what communists and union organizers. They burned down opposition newspapers. They intimidated voters. They were thugs, but thugs with a purpose. And here's what's disturbing. A lot of people loved it. Business owners funded them because they broke strikes. Landowners supported them because they kept workers in line. Even the police often looked the other way because, hey, at least someone was doing something about the communist threat. Mussolini was building a movement based on violence, nationalism, and the promise of restoring Italy to greatness. Sound familiar? October 1922. This is the moment everything changes. Mussolini organized the March on Rome, thousands of black shirts converging on the capital, demanding power. It was part protest, part coup, part elaborate bluff. Here's the crazy part. Mussolini wasn't even there. He stayed in Milan near the Swiss border in case things went wrong and he needed to flee. That's right, the great strongman was hedging his bets. But King Victor Emmanuel III panicked. He was terrified of civil war. Instead of ordering the army to stop the march, he invited Mussolini to Rome and asked him to form a government. Just like that. No election, no democratic mandate, just intimidation and fear. On October 30th, 1922, Benito Mussolini became Prime Minister of Italy at age 39. Now, at first, Mussolini played it somewhat smart. He didn't immediately declare himself dictator. He worked within the system, at least on paper. But behind the scenes, total brutality. In 1924, socialist politician Giacomo Matteotti publicly denounced fascist violence and corruption. Weeks later, he was kidnapped and murdered by fascist thugs. The evidence pointed straight to Mussolini's inner circle. There was outrage. Opposition parties walked out of parliament in protest. For a moment, it seemed like Mussolini might actually fall. Instead, he doubled down. In January 1925, he gave a speech taking full responsibility, not apologizing, but essentially saying, "Yeah, and what are you going to do about it?" He declared that Italy needed a strong hand, not weak democracy. Over the next few years, he systematically dismantled Italian democracy. Opposition parties? Banned. Free press? Shut down. Independent unions? Destroyed. By 1928, Italy was a one-party dictatorship with Mussolini as Il Duce, the leader. And here's where it gets interesting. Because while Mussolini was building his fascist state, a young failed artist in Germany was watching closely, taking notes, getting ideas. Adolf Hitler literally studied Mussolini's playbook, the pageantry, the violence, the cult of personality, the scapegoating, all of it. When they first met in 1934 in Venice, Hitler was nervous, excited. Meeting his hero, Mussolini? He thought Hitler was a joke. He mocked his appearance, called him that mad little clown, and told aides that the Nazis were crude compared to sophisticated Italian fascism. But pride, as they say, comes before the fall. Mussolini had a vision: restore the Roman Empire, make Italy a Mediterranean superpower, command respect and fear from the world. There was just one problem. Italy didn't have the resources, the military, or the industrial base to back up these ambitions. But Mussolini didn't let reality get in the way. In 1935, he launched an invasion of Ethiopia, one of the last independent African nations. This was supposed to be Italy's grand imperial moment, avenging an embarrassing defeat from 1896. It took 7 months and the use of poison gas against a largely pre-industrial army to finally win. 7 months. to defeat a nation without a real air force, without modern artillery, where many soldiers were armed with spears. The world condemned Italy. The League of Nations imposed sanctions. Mussolini was isolated. And who reached out to offer friendship? Adolf Hitler. This is where Mussolini made the biggest mistake of his life. Hitler was offering an alliance, the Rome-Berlin Axis. On paper, it sounded good. Two fascist powers dominating Europe together. But in reality, it was Germany using Italy as a junior partner. By the late 1930s, the dynamic had completely shifted. Hitler wasn't the nervous fanboy anymore. He was running circles around Mussolini. Germany annexed Austria in 1938. Mussolini could only watch. Hitler took Czechoslovakia. Same thing. The world was starting to see what Mussolini couldn't admit. Germany was the real power, and Italy was just along for the ride. But Mussolini's ego wouldn't let him accept it. He needed a victory of his own. October 28, 1940. Without consulting Hitler, Mussolini orders the invasion of Greece. He wanted his own blitzkrieg moment. He wanted to prove Italy didn't need Germany. He allegedly told his generals, "Hitler always presents me with a fait accompli. This time, I'm going to pay him back in his own coin." What happened next was one of the most humiliating military disasters of World War II. The Greeks didn't just defend themselves, they pushed the Italian army back into Albania. The Italian soldiers were poorly equipped, poorly led, and frankly, didn't want to be there. Some froze to death in the mountains. Others surrendered in droves. Mussolini had to beg Hitler for help. German troops had to invade Greece just to save Italy from total defeat. The pattern was set, and it would repeat over and over. Italy's campaign in North Africa was supposed to threaten British control of Egypt and the Suez Canal. Instead, it became another disaster requiring German rescue. Italian forces, despite outnumbering the British, suffered devastating defeats. Hitler had to send Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps to bail them out. Again, here's what's tragic. Italian soldiers weren't cowards. Many fought bravely. But they were let down by incompetent leadership, outdated equipment, and a dictator more interested in propaganda than reality. Mussolini kept promising victories while his armies kept losing. He kept playing the strongman while becoming increasingly dependent on Germany. By 1942, the truth was undeniable. Italy was dead weight. Mussolini wasn't Hitler's partner. He was his burden. Meanwhile, back in Italy, things were falling apart. Allied bombing raids devastated cities. Food shortages led to rationing and black markets. People were tired, hungry, and angry. The propaganda wasn't working anymore. You can only tell people you're winning when they're clearly losing for so long before they stop believing you. Strikes broke out in northern industrial cities, something unthinkable just years earlier. The fascist grip was slipping. And the Italian elite, the same people who'd empowered Mussolini, started looking for an exit strategy. Because what happens next is something straight out of a political thriller. The man who seized power through force and intimidation is about to experience the ultimate betrayal from the very system he created, from his own inner circle, from the people he trusted most. July 1943. The Allies have just invaded Sicily. Italy is clearly losing the war, and inside the Fascist Grand Council, a conspiracy is brewing. July 24th, 1943. The Fascist Grand Council meets. This body, handpicked by Mussolini, hasn't met in years. He ruled by decree, not consultation. But now, with Italy crumbling, they've forced a meeting. One of Mussolini's oldest allies, Dino Grandi, presents a motion: transfer military command from Mussolini to the king. It's essentially a vote of no confidence. The debate goes for hours. Mussolini seems strangely passive, almost detached from reality. He's exhausted, sick, and possibly aware that the end is near. When the vote comes, 19 in favor, 7 against. His own Grand Council, the men he appointed, the men who owed him everything, had turned on him. Even his son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano, voted against him. The next day, July 25th, Mussolini is summoned to meet King Victor Emmanuel III. He arrives at the royal villa expecting a routine conversation. Instead, the king tells him he's been replaced. There are military police waiting outside. Mussolini is arrested. No resistance, no last stand, no loyal black shirts rushing to save him. Just arrested. The man who'd ruled Italy for 21 years was removed like an employee who'd tanked the company. He's taken to various prisons, eventually ending up at Campo Imperatore, a ski resort in the Apennine Mountains, high up and isolated. It seems like it's over. The crowds in Rome that night didn't riot. They celebrated. They tore down fascist symbols. They danced in the streets. 21 years of dictatorship seemed to be ending, not with violence, but with relief. But across the border in Germany, Hitler was furious. Hitler couldn't let Mussolini fall, not just for strategic reasons, but personal ones. This was his mentor, his inspiration. Also, if Mussolini could be overthrown, what did that say about Hitler's own security? On September 12, 1943, Nazi commandos launched Operation Oak, a daring glider raid on Campo Imperatore. They landed near the resort, overwhelmed the Italian guards, who barely resisted, and extracted Mussolini. It was militarily impressive, but here's the thing. It wasn't a triumphant rescue, it was a kidnapping. Mussolini didn't want to go back. He was tired, sick, and defeated. But Hitler needed him as a puppet. Hitler installed Mussolini as the leader of the Italian Social Republic, controlling northern Italy while the Allies advanced from the south. It was a joke. Everyone knew it. Mussolini gave speeches, signed decrees, but he had zero real power. German officers made all the actual decisions. This wasn't leadership. It was humiliation disguised as authority. Mussolini knew it too. He became increasingly paranoid and depressed. His health deteriorated. His famous charisma vanished. He was a shell of his former self, going through the motions while his world collapsed. One of his first acts in this puppet regime was signing death warrants for the Grand Council members who'd voted against him, including his own son-in-law, Ciano. Ciano was executed by firing squad in January 1944. His wife, Mussolini's own daughter, never forgave her father. She even gave Ciano's diaries to the Allies, diaries that revealed all the regime's secrets and crimes. Even Mussolini's family was done with him. By April 1945, it was over. The Allies were closing in. The Third Reich was collapsing. Even the most delusional Nazi could see the end coming. Mussolini tried to negotiate. He tried to surrender to the Allies. He tried to cut deals. Nothing worked. Finally, on April 25th, he decided to run. Mussolini, his mistress Clara Petacci, and a small group of loyalists tried to flee to Switzerland, hoping to somehow escape to Spain and then South America. They attached themselves to a German convoy retreating north. Mussolini wore a German greatcoat and helmet, trying to disguise himself. On April 27th, near Lake Como, Italian partisans stopped the convoy at a checkpoint. They were looking for fascists. They checked documents, and someone recognized Mussolini despite his disguise. Game over. April 28th, 1945. Late afternoon. Mussolini and Petacci were taken to a villa in the small village of Giulino di Mezzegra. A partisan commander arrived with a simple order: execute them. There are different accounts of exactly what happened. Some say Mussolini stood defiantly. Others say he begged for his life. The truth? We'll probably never know for sure. What we do know is this: they were shot, along with other fascist officials, near the gates of the villa. But that wasn't the end of the story. The bodies were loaded into a van and driven to Milan, to a place called Piazzale Loreto. This wasn't random. This was symbolic. Months earlier, 15 partisans had been executed by fascists at this exact location, their bodies left on display as a warning. Now it was Mussolini's turn. His body, Petacci's body, and the bodies of other executed fascists were dumped in the square. At first, crowds just stared. Then someone kicked the corpses. Then someone else spat on them. Then it escalated. The bodies were beaten, mutilated, urinated on. Women who'd lost sons to Mussolini's wars fired pistols into his corpse. People threw vegetables and stones. Eventually, someone had the idea to hang the bodies upside down from the roof of a gas station to give everyone a better view. And that's the image that went around the world. Mussolini, the once powerful dictator, hanging upside down like a piece of meat, his face swollen and bloodied, while crowds jeered below. It's one of the most iconic and horrifying photographs of the 20th century. What went wrong? So how did we get here? How did the man who invented modern fascism, who inspired Hitler, who ruled Italy for 2 decades, end up like this? Let's break it down. First, he believed his own propaganda. Mussolini convinced himself that Italy was a great power because he'd declared it won. He thought will and rhetoric could substitute for industrial capacity and military competence. They couldn't. Second, he hitched his wagon to Hitler. Once he aligned with Nazi Germany, he was trapped. He couldn't back out. He couldn't admit Germany was the dominant partner. His ego wouldn't allow it, so he kept making increasingly desperate decisions to prove Italy's worth. Third, he surrounded himself with yes-men. Fascist regimes don't reward honesty, they reward loyalty. So Mussolini's generals and advisors kept telling him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to know. By the time reality forced its way in, it was too late. Fourth, he mistook fear for respect. People obeyed him because they were afraid, not because they believed in him. The moment that fear lifted, the moment the regime showed weakness, loyalty evaporated overnight. Here's the tragic irony. Hitler outlasted Mussolini by only a week. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker on April 30th, 1945, just 2 days after Mussolini's execution. Both men met pathetic ends, but at least Hitler got to control his own death. Mussolini didn't even get that dignity. The student had surpassed the teacher in every way, including evil, including megalomania, and including the dramatic nature of his downfall. Mussolini's body was eventually buried in an unmarked grave. Years later, neo-fascists stole it, creating a bizarre political incident. Eventually, it was returned to his family and buried in his hometown of Predappio, where, disturbingly, his tomb has become a pilgrimage site for modern fascists. But his political legacy? It's complicated. On one hand, he's a cautionary tale about the dangers of authoritarianism, demagoguery, and the cult of personality. On the other hand, the playbook he created, the use of spectacle, the weaponization of nationalism, the normalization of political violence, the scapegoating of minorities, the contempt for democratic institutions, that playbook didn't die with him. We're still seeing variations of it today, in different countries, with different leaders. The names and faces change, but the tactics remain eerily familiar. What we can learn. If there's one lesson from Mussolini's rise and fall, it's this: strongman politics always collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. Authoritarians can seize power. They can intimidate opponents. They can create the illusion of strength through propaganda and pageantry. But eventually, reality intrudes. Wars have to be won, not just declared. Economies have to function, not just be promised greatness. And when the illusion cracks, the fall is always brutal. Mussolini thought he was building a new Roman Empire that would last 1,000 years. It lasted 23. So, there you have it. The complete arc of Benito Mussolini, from socialist revolutionary to fascist dictator to Hitler's incompetent sidekick to corpse hanging at a gas station. It's a story of ambition outpacing ability, of ego overriding judgment, of spectacle masquerading as substance until reality finally caught up. And it's a reminder that no matter how powerful someone seems, no matter how invincible they appear, history has a way of humbling the arrogant and exposing the frauds. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. This was a long one, but I think it's important to understand the full story, not just the simplified version we get in textbooks. If you found value in this deep dive, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who appreciates real history, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a community here of people who want to actually understand the past, not just consume surface-level content. Drop a comment and let me know. What shocked you most about Mussolini's story? Did anything surprise you? What historical figure should I cover next? I've got some incredible episodes coming up, including one about the dictator who actually got away with it and died peacefully in old age. Yeah, that happened. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and remember, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more interesting revelations like this.